Hey, welcome to a very special episode of the Brown Olive Podcast. I know it's been quite a while, but we're getting into the holiday season. And today we have our special, reoccurring, just all around special co host, Andrew Griggs. Andrew,
Hello. Long time no see.
if you all notice, he's looking a little bit more beautiful. We know the body recovers wonderfully. So glad to have you back. Glad to see you're looking well today.
Yeah, my body's been good to me lately, so.
Okay. So today, is a special episode. It's not going to be a full drawn out episode. We have more coming. We have more in the pipeline. But today, we had a couple recent big events happening in our country. And I guess let's just start with that first. Let's get the weird feelings out of the way, and then we can talk about the good stuff later on.
You sure this isn't the good stuff? I think this is the good stuff. Go ahead.
So, and that's the conversation, I believe. So I think, we could talk about how, most recently in the last couple of days or so, everyone's pretty much, I'm sure, has heard. And if you see, there's like a ticker above me about, the Brian Thompson, United Healthcare CEO being, I think most media groups are using now, assassinated in this attack where the man was 50-year-old CEO, gunned down at 6 a.m., leaving his hotel on a way to an investors meeting. I know it sounds like it's something out of a, Joel Schumacher movie, but I think that's the main context. And the guy, has been on the run. He's on the lam, and he's managed. Police have recently confirmed that he's managed to leave Manhattan, most likely like on a bus via a bus terminal, using a New Jersey fake license or ID, or someone else's. And so the guy's on the run. He's on the lam. There's a big manhunt happening right now. Aside from that tragedy, so to speak, and I think that's where the conversation is going to pivot. A lot of the country has kind of found catharsis in this. Using that Greek word because I'm speaking to a Greek man across from me, but catharsis is that feeling, of almost like peace and calm and almost like shining, like taking pleasure in others' misfortune. Like most Greek tragedies, I think like a lot of people in the country kind of like let out a big sigh of relief when this happened because, it's no secret, our American healthcare system is probably one of the worst. People have died. Claims are being denied. Kids that are on chemo that are like, trying to beat cancer are being denied nausea medicine. And, these big insurers bring to courts, they go to power. They have all the power and all the money and they'll draw it out until you lose. And it's safe to say, and I think matter of factly, people have probably died because of miscare, bad care, and lack of access care, or just the waiting process of the whole thing. That's just for context. But I think, the thing that came out of this is a response of people in the country. I think, this guy has been heralded in some places as like the hero that the city needed, or, Batman, so to speak, or the Joker, or a vigilante that's bringing justice to the unjust that don't get it. And also there's the reality that it's also a murder in broad daylight in the middle of a big city and in front of our cameras and in a society where everything is on CCTV. There's this massive hyper surveillance culture. Something like this is pretty brazen. But I guess I'll turn it to Andrew to share some thoughts and give a little bit of context on what his feelings were initially after hearing this and following it in the coming days. Go ahead.
Well, the first thing that I think, the first way that I reacted was no surprise. Actually, I think it was when I was on my way to work or something, the news reported, blah, 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 last night, man killed, or this morning, man killed. And I was like, oh, wow. And then they said, United Healthcare CEO. And I was like, whoa, that is pretty brazen. And also, I wasn't that surprised. Beyond that, though, I think, I started to wonder about the motives, which I think is what we're still wondering. I don't think the motive is, I don't think it's clear. And I don't think that assuming too much right now is ethical, I guess. But I do think later on, I started to about, possibilities, right? Why would someone do this? Well, it could be a disgruntled disgruntled employee, disgruntled customer, disgruntled family member. Could be, someone for whatever reason. And then I was wondering, is this like that old pop culture reference that doesn't matter anymore, Boondock Saints, right? The everyday people cheer for the good bad guys who take out all of the bad guys, right? Corporate or otherwise. But I think what's most interesting now, having had time to think about it for the past, 36 hours, is that I think that this really is a clear case. And I do think that this part that I'm saying is actually healthy for us to discuss. And I think it's actually just healthy on the face of it. That I think this is a clear case of witnessing folklore happening in real time.
Tell me more about that. Tell me more about that.
Okay. So, we have, you've been talking about the brazenness of it, how, this perpetrator, do they seem cowardly? Is it brave? Is it whatever? And, all of those things matter to the people in the moment, but, they don't matter now when it comes to, people who thought that Jesse James was brazen or cowardly, or Pancho Villa was brazen or cowardly. And I think that both of those characters, while being real people, are now characters, but also they are folk characters. They are folk heroes in some senses too, which brings me to our herp, who seems, he's played it like a professional, right? He's not, it seems, but also I think that it's really gotten to a pulse of how people have been feeling about the healthcare system for decades. And I think maybe most of the people who grew up in the healthcare system as it has been for the past 2 decades, that's millennials now, millennials are the predominant workforce, and older Gen Z are actually they're tired of these CEOs. They're just tired of them. And so I think that this praise that we're hearing, problematic or otherwise, has created this person. This person now is going to exist forever in the zeitgeist as, like, I think you mentioned it, like a Robin Hood type character, right? In a sense, regardless of the motives at the end of the day. I think the action itself and everything beyond that, the clear-cut escape, somehow just getting out of the city, all of that is it's perfect for a folk net, right?
Yes.
Which I think is where we are.
I think that's spot on. I think what you've highlighted is what's been happening in the last couple of days post this assassination. And I guess my only, not gripe, but I want to say, like, just concern is that, yes, there is a need for catharsis. We need to feel like, all right, not helpless. Like, okay, something's happened. We're trying to show the big guys with all the power that, if you continue going down this road, there is some sense of justice. And I'm using that in quotes, right? I think, my only concern is that, that kind of framework of creating symbols to like bring down these big institutions that are unfair and all powerful. I think as a symbolic thing, it's okay. But I think once it starts becoming like lore, myth, and narratives start building behind it, because narratives are very powerful, right? They can start embedding into our framework of how we decide and act next. And I'm not saying on an individual level, but I'm saying on a societal level. And I might get a lot of flack for saying this, but I feel like if you look at, militaristic countries, that they leverage these type of events. It becomes political now. And I worry that when these kinds of events happen, whether initially motivated politically or not, right? We still don't know the motive. The public consumes it. And for some who have power or voices or followers, they take this narrative and it becomes a political tool. And they are the ones that control where it goes, what's being told, and what's the narrative behind it. And in this day and age where misinformation and information people get from all nooks and crannies of the internet, right? There's no one, even as you see that ticker behind me, not many people walk past this room, probably hundreds of people a day, and no one stops and looks at it. No one cares that it's from Reuters or it's from this or that. They'll get their news from TikTok. They'll get their news from social. They'll get it from X/Twitter, from some guy that has, 30,000 followers and is like, talking about this. And then, we go down that conspiratorial rabbit hole. That's my only concern. I think my concern is like, yes, we're allowed to feel these things. We're allowed to throw these things out in the echo chamber. But I think we also, as people that are retelling these stories and talking to other people, it's important to have that thread of truth and that thread of like, what is really the cause of this, right? But yeah, I think that's the only thing. Like, I just worry that, this, like, I'm pretty sure already, like, once the motive comes out, which is probably just a matter of time, Fox News or the media or these talking heads are going to spin it. And then, and then it becomes something. And I guess that's my concern, right? I don't know. Do you think that's unfounded or?
I think, excuse me, I think it's an interesting way to go about it. I also see the caution about it. As far as I've seen, I don't think anyone's taken that route yet. And I guess I have a question. Are you saying that you distinguish a difference between a folk character and then the lore that grows behind that folking of a character? So you're saying
Exactly.
those two different things. So there can be a folk character that just sort of like pops up. So
Yeah.
this guy is now a folk character, but then you're talking about the folk history, right? Okay, I see what you're saying.
Exactly. Well said. Yeah, you said it clearly. Yeah. Yeah. And I think, like,
Yeah.
and this as someone who, has an interest and passion in folklore, you know, how does that narrative change throughout time? I'm curious.
Well, I mean,
Or
tradition.
now, right?
Yeah, traditionally you have, like you've said, the people in power. I mean, one thing that I think we could bring up that's folk history that, you know, I'll bring it up, but I know that I'll get flack, not you. So folk history, we can talk about folk history right now in terms of power. We can talk about the state of Israel. I mean, frankly speaking, if we're talking about power using folklore as folk history, the Israel's right to defend itself, that quote has become like a staple in its use of defense, right? They have a right to defend themselves because they were, these innocent people died, but also Israel was built as a safe protection place. But also these kind of folk histories redact the other people, the other, right? I mean, we're already getting into Said territory, the other, right? So I think that if we're talking about power and the use of folklore, that is a clear case. If you want to get even more heavy-handed, I mean, we live in it. America. America is a folk story. I do think that there's a distinction, kind of, in terms of what's happening right now, though. So Jesse James was a killer. Jesse James murdered people. Che Guevara murdered people. All of these things. Again, not making a judgment call from my own perspective, but they did. But also, they still live on with the people. I mean, you have like a tattoo artist, who dated Sandra Bullock, called Jesse James, right? Or something like that. Plenty of movies. I think that this person, regardless of the motive and how the powers that be take that motive and historicize it for their own, I don't know, nefarious uses, that this folk character for the people in the long run might not be a bad thing. And what I mean by that is that folklore is built for us to feel like we matter, right? Folklore is about the farmer, the working class person. Folklore is about that. And regardless of this killer and what they did and their motives, I think that what we're seeing is this, like you said, this cathartic moment that is becoming a story about America's catharsis with healthcare.
Very well said. I guess my question is, and I want to let folks digest that a little bit because you said some really good, poignant thoughts and connected it to history, gave some great context. I think, does does the context change if we find out the reasons behind it?
For some, maybe. For others, no, right? I mean, there's another folk hero, another folk character that I think is important that everyone's forgotten about. I didn't forget because it was basically a folk story. Not necessarily for me, but I was reading it as that when it happened. But back in, what was it, 2013, 2014, the Christopher Dorner murder spree, the cop, right? I think that if not folklore, is folklore adjacent. Now that, is not necessarily championed by many people, if at all. But I wonder if there are people out there who, do think those extra unethical thoughts about, well, a cop's a cop and they blah, 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 whatever, something like that. Yeah, I do think that there might be something that will change. I don't know if it'll change for everybody. I don't think it'll change what's already been cemented in history now, because history is always here, right? We're always in history. So as far as history is concerned, I think there's a folk character that exists now. And that is the man who killed a United Healthcare CEO.
Now, I think if we like take a step back from the thoughts of all this, right?
Excuse me, assassinated. I'm sorry.
Yeah. If we step back a moment, I think, and digest all this, like, I think, yes, we can rationalize our feelings, we can rationalize our thoughts, we can organize them in a way to say, this is how I feel because this happened. But I think if we step even further back, right, we try to look at larger picture, big picture from the distance. Is there any danger in a culture celebrating murder and death? That's just my concern. It's like that moment of when, and for some folks that are young may not remember this, but I remember because I'm old, like when Osama bin Laden was assassinated, right? Like, there was this military project. It was under Obama, remember? And, the Navy SEALs broke in and assassinated him. And I just remember seeing the news story and like folks were out in Times Square celebrating this. It was like a cathartic moment of terrorism, of people overseas, of, I just worry. Like I remember distinctly that feeling of people cheering and saying, yeah, he's dead, whatever, this, F them. I remember that moment candidly because I for some reason I was troubled and disturbed by people cheering. Like I get the sentiments behind it. I get the rationale. I can connect the dots on why someone would react that way and feel that way. But I think seeing it play out in front of me, it just seemed still uncomfortable. I think I get it. We need relief. We need, catharsis, in some way or another, whether we're in proxy wars or whatever, or people that served in the military and the families that passed away. I get that. I get that sense. But is the symbolism worth the trade-off on our culture? I think will we become desensitized and we're still celebrating just an assassination, a military project, a death, gunning down people, families being killed in the process for this to happen. I don't say it's wrong because I think it'll happen no matter what. That's just human nature, right? We feel good and we feel bad and we feel uncomfortable. But I would just throw caution into the air and say that, yes, feel and experience all these things, but also don't get lost in it. Also realize at the end, there's still lives that have come at the cost of this. And I guess I'm the old man just saying, hey, just be cautious. Don't celebrate or don't overjoy or don't laugh too much. Be mindful that at the end of the day, we're still celebrating, like regarding Osama bin Laden, like this massive military complex. And that celebration is another acceptance of our military state and our overreach in the global landscape. I don't want us to forget that. I don't want us to just remember these brief moments of joy and then we're still funding the military complex. That's my only thing. And I don't think there's anything wrong with anybody that's cheering. I feel like that's in your right. If you feel that, it's your prerogative. But I also want us to be complex and to juggle that uncomfortable feeling as well. Because I think that's what we do as people who weigh conscientiously what we need to do and what is good and what is bad. And not that I am the arbiter of it, but I think it's good for us to question these things.
So, two things. One, you've already covered it a little bit, but maybe you could just time travel for a second. I'm going to ask you a question and I'd like you to try to unpack your feelings. What was this troubled feeling? Where was it coming from?
So, no, that's a great question. And I think you're right. Maybe I didn't say enough to it, but I think the trouble feeling was because those same people, like there was groups of people that were cheering this, like for example, the Osama bin Laden death, which is, I think we could say was, I guess, in the long term, without getting too deep, like I think that probably needed to happen. If we're talking about strategically, tactically, it probably needed to happen. How and what lengths and what like drone proxy wars we were doing, probably not. But I think the thing that immediately, just without getting too political or intellectual about it, was that when I was walking by Times Square and I saw people cheering, I saw like normal people like me and you saying, yeah, this is great. America's winning. Fine. But then I also saw people cheering that are like, fuck those people over there. The Muslims are terrorists, blah, 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 this and that. And that was the one wave that I thought, okay, there are different people in these groups celebrating this, different reasons. And so one was racially motivated, thinking that all these people should be killed and wiped out, and that all people are like Osama bin Laden, which was like horrendous to think about. And then I thought about, I'm like, oh my God, they're all sharing this same space. And if we just minimize this and say, oh, we're just, celebrating a death of this person, we're giving legitimacy to those people that are shouting like, racial hatred and prejudice and racism. They're being allowed to slide into this group of acceptance, which is what happened. And if you look at now, like I don't want to go too down this rabbit hole, but because then that's a whole nother like 5 episodes. But I think we've let things slide so often that these people that are, you know, passing as like normal passing or acceptable passing now are in our everyday lives. And we look around, and this is why we have Trump as our second person. This is why we have homophobia and racism, even more blatant, and immigrant hate now, because these people were able to post behind these, you know, dubious celebratory moments, fit in for a moment, be accepted, and then move on. And then throughout our events that led up to now, these people do that. They're like, oh, we can celebrate together. Let's build humanity with them. And so that has always been my concern. And I witnessed that back then. And that's why I was bothered by it. Because I was like, I'm not going to cheer along with that guy over there. That's flat out is hating, has Islamophobia and is saying all these things. I'm not clapping and cheering for the same thing. There's a big distinction there. So that's the one, caution that I always throw. And I remember that's the big thing that really, I think, put me on this path now. When I see any kind of big thing that becomes cultural now, right? Like this, I just urge people to be cautious and just to think about it a little bit more. Yeah, celebrate, do what you have to do, but just look around you and see who's celebrating, because people are celebrating for different reasons.
So I think it's very poetic given what just tickered across the ticker there. I don't
What
know
was
if you
that?
saw.
No,
So
no,
it
no. What was
said,
that?
there's another folk hero that we have to talk about. Actually, so across the ticker, as you were talking, it says President-elect Trump calls for immediate ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia, and then they put a quote: "The madness," right? You can even hear the madness.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Huge, right? No, I think that was poetic. It's just funny as well that was right then there. But yeah, no, I see what you're saying. I do. And this is what I think maybe this is the real message, the real conversation we're trying to get the audience to think about. I don't think it's about sides, but I think it's about being cautious to understand what history and what fiction and what your place and your perspective in that is. And I think that folklore is something that is used for both of those things. I think that folklore is neither good nor bad. It's just folklore. And yeah, there is that real worry that the folking of whatever is going to be appropriated by the powers that be. And it's going to be calcified in this sense of the Star Spangled Banner, or which also we never talk about. I don't think anyone ever talks about the lyrics that are not sung during the Star Spangled Banner. But we don't need to get into that. That's a little more whatever. But yeah, I think that that's something. I agree. Right now, though, well, I don't. Right now, I'm not sure I see something bad about the folklorizing of the person who is still a fugitive
Right,
right now.
right. Yeah, go ahead, go
And
ahead. Yeah,
here's why. I mean, there's another thing, because regardless, we've talked about this. We've talked about the motive, and, we said we weren't necessarily going to get into that, but just briefly, we've talked about the motive and that, is this guy a coward? What's this guy's message here? And it does seem interesting to me. A couple of things. One, he's taken this kind of like secret agent route. So regardless of whether he's a professional or not, he is definitely playing it from the angle of, stories that we see in Hollywood or indie films, like not the James Bonds, but like the real, secret agents or assassins. And then beyond that, you have the bullets with the etchings, deny, depose. What was the third one?
I'm gonna keep working on your point because I'm gonna jump in something with something really sensational, and we've talked about it already before, but I have to bring it up. I have to. It's like brimming right now.
Okay.
Good. No, finish your point though. I don't want to cut you off fully. I'm just letting you know I'm gonna come full force.
Okay. So it's deny, depose, and whatever etched on the bullets, which are the allegedly what health insurance companies use to send to clients or whatever and say whether they can, have health insurance. But these words are usually used when they deny that thing or say you got to wait. But then you have even further what happened yesterday when they found his backpack. You know the two items that were in the backpack?
What's that?
Well, I can't remember the first, but I do think that this is something that shouldn't be taken lightly. And that is the second item were Monopoly bills, like Monopoly, the board game money. There was no weapon in the back. So I think that regardless of what the reality and the truth or the truths, because there might be multiple truths here, are, I do think that this person has been cognizant enough to maybe be playing games with the people who are in power, who usually are sent to protect us, to do those things, right? Monopoly money. I mean, that's something else. That's not just, you know what I mean? Anyway, what were you going to say?
Well, I mean, and we've had this conversation at length already, but I just have to bring it up because I'd be remiss if I didn't. I think, and I think you described like this is a historical moment or mythical moment for you of like folklore, and it's already happened. But this is the part where I think I want to pivot back to that scene where Times Square, the announcement of Osama bin Laden being killed, and whatever blah 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 being celebrated. And this is maybe polemical, but I have to mention it because I think there are blind spots and for everybody, right? And how we view events folding out, right? We only have our own historicity. We have our own single lane perspective. It's just like a personal bias we all have, right? You really can't step out of that. We have to be challenged in order to do so sometimes or most times. And I think I just have issue thinking that we're celebrating a white person assassinating another person. And immediately, he's heralded like as a hero and this and that. And I think about like, what if this was a black person or a brown person or a person of other color? Would the myth and lore still be following it? Probably not. No. And I think we're falling back to if we sometimes look at myth and lores and stories, they're all white saviors for the most part. There's very rare pieces of moments in history. And not that there isn't, because there is, that it's always Prince Charming or the white guy that's romanticized and this and that. And it's never really like people of color that are being heralded this way or afforded this privilege of being seen as heroic. Heroicism, typically afforded to those with privilege and power. And it's very limited. And I'm not saying there isn't, because there are stories and narratives that happen, but they're so far and in between. And I think culturally now, it's easier, just like Hollywood, it's easier to cast that, tall, good looking hero that, everyone could get behind. And I just think about the inequities, and if this was a person of different color or a person from a different race and this happened, the narrative would be completely different. The media wouldn't be building it up as like, this is this, vigilante hero guy, that's taking down the big man. The narrative would be completely different. It'd be like terrorist, murderer, assassin. They wouldn't even be like crediting his intelligence or anything. It'd be just downplaying as like, oh, there's violent murder in broad daylight, this cold killer, like none of these words are being used because he's afforded the privilege of, being this. And then on top of that, the whole pop culture behind it of like, oh, he's an attractive, white man possibly doing this and that. I just have to say that this guy's skirting on that, because the truth is we still live in a Eurocentric culture, and not you per se, but like our culture as a whole, our TV, our media, the way stories are told, is these guys are afforded that kind of thing. So I want to be mindful, because again, my perspective when I'm seeing this in Times Square fall out years ago, it was all white people for the most part celebrating this. Not many people of color were there celebrating this. And that's not to say that they supported Osama bin Laden, but there's a sense of like being in a room full of white people, cheering a person of color being killed or gunned down, or just heralding this person as a hero when other people are not given this kind of thing. Yeah, and it's just that. And then I think about even the guy that was the young kid, I forget his name, Kyle Rittenhouse, right? Like, look at that example, right? In some circles, the MAGA folks, those conservative folks, the gun-loving folks, they heralded him as a hero. But then the other narrative is this dude was literally picked up a gun, walked into a protest, and started gunning down people of color. And this is where, like, in that, there's obviously the Rittenhouse extreme, and then there's this guy, the United Healthcare killer extreme. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention these two parallels that I want us to be mindful of. And that's it. That's all I would say. I think I just have to throw that out there, even though it's uncomfortable. People are probably maybe triggered by it, but I just have to say it because that's the elephant in the room.
Well, I agree with you. I think that that white supremacy, and I'm not mincing my words here, has been clearly here for centuries. I do think that there was an instance that I brought up that I think should be thought about more. I'm not saying neither in a good or bad way. This is not a judgment call or a personal belief, but I do think that the Christopher Dorner story is something that people really should.
Can you give context? Because I think maybe you might have missed a line of context that's really important to that, because I think people might not know.
Yeah, Christopher
And
Dorner
say the race. I think people
was a black police officer. And this, I just want to make sure I get the year correct. Christopher Dorner was a black police officer who in 2013, that's the year, in 2013, proceeded to gun down high-level police officers. And here's like the thing that's really sad. And also some of these high-level police officers' family who are not cops. It was kind of like one of those things where, I don't know, whatever. The movie, the bad guy, kills the heroes, blah, 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 before he kills them, right? That sort of thing. Christopher Dorner, his case is very complicated because, one, black police officer, former Marine maybe, I can't remember, but I think some sort of military background. And history has shown now for at least several years before, his violence happened in 2013, he was actually fighting within the system to talk about, racism. He felt that there was racism. He felt that he was being treated unfairly. He was being not taken seriously. He filed complaints, which is apparently the number one thing you don't do when you're a cop, doing this against other cops. So he immediately, I guess, according to, the cop union, became, the bad guy. And it probably didn't help that generally the police force across the United States has taken historically plays from white supremacist organizations. I mean, it's just fact. If you look it up, you can find it in post-World War II. You can find it all over the place. So a black police officer filing complaints within the police system against his peers, that didn't go so well for him, and he was suspended, I think, indefinitely. What happened after that, to speed up the story, something happened. He wrote some sort of manifesto. He went out, planned something, and he murdered all of these people, and he was missing for weeks. Sort of like what's happening right now. Eventually, he was cornered, essentially caught in a cabin in the woods in like Nevada or something, and he took his own life when a raid, they launched smoke grenades at him or something like that. A tragedy on all accounts, all around in that story, if there was anything good or, what all the bad things were. So I think that that's context that everyone needs, especially in this case, because Christopher Dorner was a Black man. And I do think personally that is a folk story. And I think that's a folk story that people don't take seriously exactly because of what you said. I remember people saying, oh, he had some, he was mentally unwell, which is, I don't know, isn't that like something that we hear usually racialized, something like that, whatever. Yeah, he was minimized in a sense. His power was taken away from him, even if it was bad power that he used. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. There's a lot to say, but I think I'll stop there.
And that's good context. I think that's why we're having these conversations, because we want to give different perspectives, try to add as much of a full picture that we can, so that I think folks could be mindful of these things as we think about them and have a little bit more information. So thank you for that. That was really good context. I think, that probably should be explored. I'm sure there should be a reporter or journalist that could write the comparisons of this in a socio-economic way of in a social way that how that really works.
I hear there's an editor who could push that reporter.
I would say, I think one thing to pivot, because I want to be mindful as well of the time. We still have another segment. And you touched on it briefly, I think just as a core, and maybe this is just me because I'm a little bit of raised old school, I had like a machismo father a bit, I think, and as a young kid who grew up about learning martial arts, learning about honor, quote unquote, learning about what it is to stand up and defend yourself, and et cetera, et cetera. I think, I still find it cowardly. I don't know why. I think it's cowardly at the core. Like, we eliminate all the myth and everything. We just talk about the action itself, right? Pulling up to staking out somebody, following them, staking them out. And then as that person's walking away in the middle of broad daylight or in the crack of dawn, and taking a gun out, putting a silencer on it, and shooting them in the back a couple times, and then walking away. I know in pop culture and movies that sounds cool because it's like, oh, he's an assassin, whatever. But at the core of it, I think that action is just very weak, cowardly. I just think that's almost easy. I don't know why. I just think it's easy. Like, yeah, who doesn't want to live out some crazy fantasy where you fix your problems by shooting someone in the back? I guess. I don't know. I guess, yes, I can see, like, if we're just talking about the events unfolding and how that plays out in the bigger picture, I could see the myth building. Yes, I could see that. But at the core of it, I think if we pull back all that myth, all that story, all that lore, what you can't deny is that at the core, it's a cowardly action, right? To just pull up to somebody, they don't even know you're just walking, right? And someone just sucker punches you, and except they kill you, like, I just think that's cowardly. I think, I think to myself, like, when we talk about honor and dignity, and I guess maybe you have to do something with a bigger purpose, right? Is that way, and you can let that go. But I don't know. I just want people to also think that is now a brave thing to do. I don't want to, for the young folks that are out there, if anyone's watching this, seeing like, oh, that's cool. It's not. It's not. Like, for the young folks that are still like navigating this and what that looks like, if we pull back all the layers and looking at the core of this, it's a murder of one person who seems probably a lot younger than the 50-year-old, coming up to this guy who's on his way to work, regardless of what he's doing, and who has a family too and kids, and is a father, and dude shot in the back, killed in, coldly, with no way to defend himself. Yeah, let's not also sugarcoat this too much, because that's what culturally everyone's been doing. Not just us, but literally like society and the media, is that this is a murder at the core. And we can make stories of it, but it's a murder. And let's not forget that. And let's think about that for a second too. And I don't want this to be too like celebratory in that way, because what are we telling to the younger generation? That, you just walk up and shoot somebody and that's an answer? That's going to change our broken healthcare system? I don't know. I don't think so. I think maybe it'll send a message of sorts, right? Fear politically, but I don't, it's enough. Not that I'm encouraging more violence, but I don't think it's sustainable way to make real change, because the hard work takes time, energy, and it takes a while. It's not something that quick that you're going to instill through hitting somebody or punching somebody or killing somebody. That's not how things work in the real world. You know, I think we can hide behind a narrative. That's fine, and celebrate it and ride it. But I don't think it's going to really go far too. That's all. That's all I got to say. Just for the young generation out there, I don't want, to think that, there's nothing wrong in also disparaging this. I think we could all celebrate it and be cathartic and have feelings about it. But also, I think, you're not also wrong if you disparage this. That's all.
Well, yeah. I agree. And I have a specific context for this. As someone who sent baby powder and sugar to a certain White House, I've been
Jesus
waiting for
Christ.
Joe Biden. I've been waiting for Joe Biden to thank me for for 8 months now. That's not true.
Oh, God. All right, we'll pivot there. I think that's a good way to pivot before this gets flagged. It never sees the light of day. Let's talk about real briefly, and I know we're running really close on time because we did have a really good conversation. Tell me, you recently saw a good movie. We're going to pivot into our movie segment. So if you're not into movies, clock out. If you like movies, stay on. Is a cinephile and actually has an education and background in film. So he's actually a really good person to have this conversation with. And you'll walk away learning something and having a good framework of how to see movies. Right? It's kind of meta, right? How to really see movies. But anyway, Andrew, tell us a little bit about what you saw this weekend. Give us a little, teaser very briefly, and then tell us why folks should see this.
Well, I'm sorry to our audience. I was not watching some Mission Impossible or a Secret Agent movie this weekend in honor of our previous conversation. But I did go see. I've been waiting to see it. It's been on my list for the year. A film called Anora, and I'm sure that the general public has probably seen this because I think that this is an indie film that has been advertised in a much larger, area than most indie films. Anora is about a sex worker. Her name is Anora, and she lives in Brighton Beach. Isn't that where the Russian community is in New York? Yeah. She lives in Brighton Beach. She's a 23-year-old sex worker who works at a strip club called Headquarters. And essentially the story, which was written by the great Sean Baker, who you might have known from the films The Florida Project, Red Rocket, the famously shot on iPhone only Tangerine, all brilliant movies. He directed these. And I think the best way to describe Sean Baker, I actually came up with this the night that I saw it. I was talking to my friend and I said, Sean Baker, he's like if you put Vittorio De Sica and John Waters together. That's the director you would get.
Wow.
Very high intensity, high energy films. And he's most importantly, very, very, very much interested in filming with unknowns. To the point. The story is about Anora, who one night is, tasked by her boss to handle a client who asked for a Russian-speaking stripper. She's the only one in the club who understands Russian. She says famously that she learned it from her grandmother, so she only understands it very much more than she can speak it. And this Russian oligarch's son, Ivan, that he wants to pay her to, be his girl for a week. His quote, my horny American girlfriend. And what happens beyond that is that at some point he proposes to her, and they get married. It's very much a subversive film. The first half of the movie, I don't want to say too much, but the first half of the movie is very, very fast feeling, intense in a physical way. And you get a sense of how these people are living an immediate life. It's a sense of how life is happening right now. In fact, one thing that I'm writing in my review is that these characters, if I recall, don't even speak about memory. Memory isn't spoken about in this movie, I'm pretty sure, in the sense of memory, I remember this from a long time ago. The only time that it's brought up is when Anora talks about her grandma, or her learning Russian from her grandma, and then later on, I don't want to say too much. But what happens in the story, what shoots the story along, is that Ivan, his parents, who are Russian oligarchs, find out that he married this proletariat girlfriend, I guess is the best way to put it. And they're not going to have it. So they're going to come and get him, and they're going to force them to get an annulment. And the rest of the movie is kind of just sort of revolving around that. I do want to bring up that there is a very, very interesting performance. I forget the actor's name, but a henchman. This is a henchman movie. So, like certain I think someone should do a whole series on henchman movies, like Sicario. There's a henchman in that who's a kind of a main character. In this, there's a henchman here. His name's Igor, and he is tasked by one of the oligarchs, right-hand man to help get Anora and Ivan to get the marriage annulled. But he comes into play. Again, the story is very immediate, but I think secretly that this movie is about memory. I think this movie, while in the act of not talking about memory at all, is about our experiences and how we feel these sense memories of love, loss, happiness, brilliance, exhilaration. I mean, the exhilaration of sex or something like that, or, the feeling that pang of love that you get when you're looking at someone and you say, do you want to be here with me? And they pause. And I think the movie is about memory, even though it never brings up memory as a predominant thing. I would definitely recommend that you all see it. I think it's going to be on the awards circuit. I don't know if it'll win anything. It's a little more raunchy, so, the older Oscar crew might not be into it. But I can tell you Mikey Madison deserves a nomination. Sean Baker and his wife, his partner, they both deserve a production nomination. Go see Anora. It's worth your time, and maybe you'll get your adrenaline going too.
Thank you for that great review. And I guess the last thing as we're winding down, could you share a little bit about the upcoming series that we'll be doing on Brown Olive regarding the top film of the year that you're working on? And can you give it just a very brief intro of what your methodology is like, so folks have an understanding of like what qualifies and your kind of rules behind it? Because you mentioned that everyone has their own sort of rules when kind of listing, top movies or whatever. And so I think we generally have talked about it, and it's not finalized, but I think maybe highlighting like the top 5 films that you think you're ranking as your top must see, and then top 5 notables. And the reason why it's not 10 or any other number is because you're going to go at length into them in these series that we're working on, that we hope to get out a little sooner than, before that Oscar wave hits. But go ahead, I'm just going to pivot to you.
So I have been for, I don't know, the past 2 decades, I think. I've been a, loyal cinephile. I follow movies. Movies is a love. It's a passion. And so I make lists every year, just like your regular Roger and Ebert or Jonathan Rosenbaum or Manola Dargis, whatever. And so this year, Felix has pushed me to make it a little more public. So I would say that the rules that I go off of, because most critics, have their own set of rules, are kind of overlapping with the Academy of Motion Pictures qualification rules for, a film to be nominated for an Academy Award. That is that the film has to screen in the U.S. It has to have an opening in the U.S. on the year that it's supposed to possibly get a nomination. So, if a film is nominated, it should have screened sometime between January 2024 and December 2024 in the US. I think, so in terms of the Academy, one thing that I'm not following is that it says that films must be 40 minutes long at least, because I also include short films sometimes in these lists. So, I'm not going to do that. But beyond that, I think that maybe some films that I would say are some big highlights. I want to say Monkey Man first. Everyone needs to see that. It's, speaking of folklore, but something that transcends its own sense of use of folklore. Monkey Man is a film that needs to be seen. It's an important film. It's a film that utilizes Hollywood action movies for a greater purpose, a political message. I think
some of it was shot on iPhone.
Yeah, maybe a third of it. I can't remember, but yeah, essentially the equipment broke down or they lost it or something, and so they shot it on Dev Patel's iPhone. Dev Patel wrote and directed it, by the way.
And it is a visual galore. It's a
Yes,
visually beautiful
it's
film.
crazy amazing. And again, it's got heart. And I think that's a big key when it comes to media. I think that I'm looking at my list here of what I've watched so far. Well, we'll leave our Nora out. I've already recommended that. So that's separate. So I guess you're getting a top 6. Monkey Man. Then I would say there's a film called Dandelion. Dandelion is actually made by a former classmate of mine and two former classmates of mine, director Nicole Riegel and producer Adam Cobb. And Dandelion is kind of a road movie about a woman named Dandelion who lives in Cincinnati. She's a musician. She gets a little jaded and she decides to run away on a personal road trip journey, and she meets a traveling band, and it's about love, it's about passion, it's about what happens when you have to make a decision when you know that someone is no good. Dandelion is a really good movie. Nicole Riegel directed it, wrote it, came out this year. Great indie movie. Challengers by Luca Guadagnino, probably one of my favorite filmmakers these days. Though I'm not that interested in seeing I Am Love, he can hack me later for that. But Challengers is a movie about tennis, and most tennis movies have been, I think, fans of tennis, the actual real tennis, are not usually happy with how movies about tennis come out. But Challengers is different. It's kind of about a menage a trois of 3 AAA pro tennis players, 1 woman and 2 men, and sort of how the game and passion and love get intertwined, and are they really that different at all? Then I would say Megalopolis. This is the wild card movie of the year. Probably, maybe, hopefully not, Francis Ford Coppola's final film he's been trying to make for the past 2 decades. Campy, dystopian, utopian, about family, all of these things. Then I would say you got, you know what? I'll just go and say a movie that I haven't seen. Everyone needs to go see Queer, another Luca Guadagnino film starring the inimitable Daniel Craig as a William S. Burroughs stand-in cipher who is in Mexico searching for ayahuasca or something and falls in love with a man who may or may not be queer. And then finally, to give you a little twist, I would recommend as my 5th the miniseries Ripley on Netflix. And I think that it's an extended look at the book Talented Mr. Ripley, about a man who's tasked by some rich kid's parents to go find the rich kid and bring him home, and how he becomes infatuated with the rich kid's life and being one of the rich kids. It's on Netflix, miniseries. We can debate about whether miniseries count or not, but that's for another episode. So that's what I have.
Thank you, Andrew, for that very thorough list, and exciting and different as well. Last thing, because we are just a little bit over time, can you share a little bit about, why you do these lists?
Well, lists don't necessarily matter in the sense of anything, but I think that they provide a kind of a thrilling sense of being in it with the movie. Kind of like what a movie experience is if it were a person. You're making a list and you get to put it as a nominee, you put it in your top 10, and you get to share with people sort of your passion, your aesthetic, the films that made you cry, the films that made you feel, the films that made you feel something. I think that, I have a love-hate relationship with critics, but, I'll say for now that right now, this is the only time you'll see me as a critic. But I love making these lists. I think that lists help people. I really do. And I think that movie lists help people really get an understanding of what they could be experiencing instead of what they always think they want to experience.
Very well said. Andrew, thank you so much for the segment. Everybody, listeners out there, thank you so much for listening in and tuning in on this special episode of the Brown Olive Podcast. Andrew, thank you as always. Follow us on Instagram. Check us out on our website. And we'll be doing some streaming series in the upcoming 2025. And make sure to follow Andrew as well. He'll be working on some big projects for 2025. Excited to start this new content. Everybody, have a happy New Year.
Folklore continues.